So our next project we're going to be working on is landscape painting. So what's a landscape painting? This is a landscape painting. So here we have a nice landscape in the mountains, landscape by Albert Bertstradt. So here we have a very majestic American landscape. We have large mountains, nice valley, trees, mountains, couple animals in the foreground there, lots of stuff taking place. What I'm looking for you guys to do is creating a landscape that uses those elements, but also works on the way that light, as well as, and also the colors in the image, working those pieces together so how light affects color. Another quick example is this image here by Thomas Kinkade. It's called Hometown Christmas. Thomas Kinkade's a modern artisan, died just a couple years ago, actually died in 2012, only at 50 years old. Big time consumer piece. Thomas Kinkade found that perfect little niche of what's gonna sell a lot and he can make a lot of money off of his art. So he was a working artisan that was living off of his own works. So here we have this piece. The one thing about Thomas Kinkade is his usage of light in an image. So using how the light comes out of the windows, and it's always, there's a house setting in all of his paintings, how the light comes out of the windows, reflects off the street, reflects off trees, people, cars, anything in that image to create a well-rounded design. Another piece by Thomas Kinkade is part of his Disney collection. For here we have Tangled, we have Rapunzel and that guy who was with Rapunzel in the movie. Finn. It's Finn. I remember. It's Finn. So for this one, you have them setting lanterns off. Lanterns are bits of light, and as they're going off into the distance, you can see them lighting up the night sky, have this really nice star effect in the way that they're structured, but how the light is coming out of them. Again, working on how the light moves across color, how that color changes as light focuses in on it. So as the light is moving away, you have nice whites, yellows, slight bits of orange around those lights, but then also around the foreground, and also around other elements inside the picture, how that light reflects off those objects. Step, I want you to observe the transition of light and the flow of the land out of the background and how the scene keeps extending out. So as this wonderful landscape moves back in a way, back towards that vanishing point, back into the line of perspective, the horizon line, all these lines move back to the distance. They're using the sunset as the anchor point. All the elements are moving in that direction, but how the light moves across the scene as well. How the light goes across the tree. So on one side you have a well-lit tree, almost like a burning bush. The light is setting the trees on fire, where you have those wonderful golds, reds, bits of burnt orange, all these pieces, but then you have this shadowness, this darkness of the light escaping in the image. Things I want you to be focusing on, how those pieces move across, how the light changes as it moves across an object, and how the structure changes by the light, because the light changes the shape in some aspects. So the leaves turn a different way because the light is being reflected off them, so that you get your oranges, your yellows, all that bits are coming out of it in that aspect. So another thing to consider, use the light to set your vanishing points and illustrate the changes in light across the image. Create a variety of tones across the image. Build the colors of your design around and how the color moves across the landscape and unifies the image together. So again, using the light in this one, they use it as an anchor point. All of your design elements are going towards that sunset. It's the emphasis of the entire piece. You want to design everything going towards that one single section. For your design, I want you to focus on the way that light is moving in the image. You're going to research these pieces, look them up on your phones, bring some pieces in, pull them out of a magazine. All these things are fine. You know me, I definitely want you guys to be using technology. My big key is I want to make sure that you have a well-rounded picture to work off of, create a wonderful design, and how the paint moves across the picture. Remember, we're going to be doing these in watercolor, so you're going to do a base level of paint, and then you're going to use the yellow paint afterwards to add that glowingness on top of it at the end. Be considerate of how these colors move in the image, how these things change. I'm going to do a painting tutorial with you before we get started on this, but you start thinking about how you can look at a landscape and how you can illustrate the landscape on your paper. So go ahead and start working on designing your landscape. You found a really cool one here of a nice Bertstradt piece that they modernized, and somebody put an AT-AT from Star Wars in the image. You can always add things into your image, into your illustration. It's fine. It's always fine with me. But I do want to see how you're using light to focus on the changes inside of that character. The next piece that we're going to be working on is the still life illustration and paint. So, a still life. These are classic. This is a picture of a classic still life. You have it by Mr. Heda, which is a still life with pie, silver ewer, and crab. Most still lifes are done just as simple objects that we're sitting around, and it is only done to help the artist work on their design of structure, design of space inside of the framing, how to frame an image, how to set things up so they're in the right location so everything works well and works well together. But let me tell you up front, still lifes, by far one of my least favorite things to do. I really don't care for them personally. However, for what you do need to know is these things are really helpful in working. But a still life is essential to working on how to make a composition, how to see that everything fits in the frame right, framing, composition. These are all those key words that we use in art. All right, now as we move towards a more modern take on a still life, because I want to do an interesting still life. If I've got to do one, might as well make it interesting. You have this picture here by Mr. Roy Lichtenstein. Roy Lichtenstein was involved in a lot of cartooning, illustration, cartoons and illustration back in the 50s and 60s. He's actually downcast by a number of comic book illustrators because they felt that he was ripping off their work. By Roy Lichtenstein, Still Life with a Palette, done in 1972. Really pixelated, lots of little dots, but you can see the forms of every single shape and how the colors and lines and everything bends around each object. Now, as we take a more modern approach on here, we have modern reference, still life, this one done by David Laguerre. You have a modern still life, a hamburger, fries, and an apple, because McDonald's is on that little health kick. But it's a basic set of objects stacked together, quickly drawn, well, not quickly drawn out, painted. You have the light casting its shadows, so how the light is affecting the coloring on different objects. What I want you to do is, in your designs, create that still life that works off of those shapes, working on the shape structure. Now your task is going to be a candy still life. So we've got a couple of examples of some candy still lifes. We have our M&Ms here, some Starbursts over here. But the key to the candy still life is the objects themselves. I'm looking on that shape to model form. Shape to model form. This is the thing that we're going to be working on. I've said this from day one, first semester. How you're creating each individual shape and how the colors and the shadowing takes around so it becomes a 3D object. I still want to be able to look at these pieces and see that candy. You can pick it up, you could eat it. That's what we want to see. Over here where we have this wonderful Starburst piece on the side, the Starburst is open in the wrapper. So you can see different textures inside of the wrapper, texture of the candy itself, how the candy looks when it's properly sealed up, but each object is a 3D element. So the 3D element, wonderful coloring on it, that's the kind of stuff that I want to see. Another good example, I found this online, another Pinterest thing, some high schooler did this. Well in your range of something that you can do, a nice structure on the lettering. This is why we did graffiti and lettering project before. Continuing on the same fact, looking at the letter structure of each individual item and creating those three-dimensional shapes. The lettering is done well, and then a paint color addition done after that. Now you're going to create an illustration that shows the structure of each object. Create an illustration that shows the structure of each object and how the object changes on the picture plane. Illustrate the objects to create shape to model forms. Illustrate the objects in three-dimensional space. On one side we have the good, to the right side we have the bad. So really nice objects, good 3D representation, lots of color. To the bad, the candy corn blobs of, I don't know what that is, but definitely not nearly as good as the M&Ms. The shape structure on the candy corn is off. These indentations that are on it, not every single candy corn has those indentations, and they're not that deep. And then the coloring could be done better. A lot of structure could be added to this. A lot more cleaner lines on the pieces. Yes, this qualifies, but let's be honest. This is about CD work to the A work that's over here. Now, when we're working with the paint, the one thing that I said, we're going to be painting with watercolor. I want to be paint objects with translucency. There should be a translucent quality to each of these objects. So we have the wonderful gummy bears on this side, a nice piece of regular candy on the other side. What I want to see is the color of the paint has a translucent quality. You can still see through it somewhat. So over here in the wrapper, just a little bit of gray scale added to it, some gray around the edges. The white of the paper is still showing through. That's how we have some of the changes up here. So the white of the paper would be here, a little bit of gray, but it fades out. Whereas on the gummy bears, you would do layers of color, and each layer that you're making darker, add a little bit of brown, maybe a little bit of black. Black, very, very minimal. I would actually do a brown or find the contrast color of the ones that are represented up here. So up here you have the yellow contrast, the complementary color, the one that works against it the best is a purple, so that's why the yellow bear over here with the purple background, this yellow bear really jumps out at you. It's a color combo thing. Same thing with the red and the green. So those two bounce off of each other so that it's in juxtaposition of each other. So think about this as you're working on paint. And finally, it's candy. Crush it. Take care of a really cool candy illustration. I look forward to seeing some really great work from you. Don't forget the translucency in the paint and create some. All right, so today we're talking about the candy landscape piece. So over here I got. All right, so today we're talking about the candy landscape piece. So over here I got two things because we got to talk about how to set up the scene. All right, so for setting up the scene, you need a piece of paper and your candy. All right, so I'm going to dump out a few of these pieces here. Now let's talk about how the candy looks. Now, when you're working on drawing your subject matter, we want to try and create the candy centralized on the paper. So if you need to get with me to get a bigger sheet of paper, just come and ask. But I definitely want to see the candy moved away from the bag, so the bag will be in there, but also have the candy separate. Now you have these. Now the candy that I have is this Japanese hard candy. Don't just leave them all in the wrapper, because as cool as this wrapper is, just drawing just this thing is pointless. Open these things up because I want to see what the candy looks like itself. So open this one. It's this nice orb kind of shape. Doesn't have to be perfectly round at all, but we want to see these jewel pieces, these candy, because they're like these little mini jewels, kind of stacked on the paper freeform. Now Skittles, Starburst, a couple of them opened up because these ones are in these little individual pouches. Having to paint all the little details on both sides of the pouches, that's going to become monotonous pretty quickly. So what I would do is have, come on, open up, man. All right, got it. And so I'm going to have a few of these pieces down so that when you're creating your drawing, your illustration, you can focus on that. Now, do we need to draw this whole big piece like this? Not necessarily. You can zoom in and just come down to this level and just draw the orbs and pieces. Make sure that I have some form of text from the pieces over here in the image in some form or fashion. Also a bit of the bag, so you can work on some of that translucent quality. Some more character design from this one. A little bit of the Japanese writing always looks cool. A little bit of the letter. So a cropped version is just as fine as a wide version, and sometimes the cropped version might be easier for you to draw. Change your perspective, move the piece around so you can say, oh, this is much more interesting than this. This looks interesting than this. Don't say, this is really easy, so this is what I'm going to draw. Make sure that you have at least wide enough to where everything's kind of in focus and that you can draw everything easily. For this bag, I really enjoyed this bag because of the translucent quality, so that I can draw something that was behind it. So if you had other objects that were sitting back here, you just throw in a little extra thing just to give it a little more interest and make it all cohesive and work a little better on it. All right, so work on the layout of your objects. Make sure that you have a good composition. Change up the way that you look at it. See what looks good, what doesn't look good. And don't forget, don't eat your model until you are done drawing it. And then by all means, you can eat them. All right, you guys have a fun candy experience on your candy landscape. See you guys later.